Hello and welcome to a series of MuleSoft tutorials on YouTube channel of tutorialspedia.com. In this MuleSoft MUnit tutorial, I will explain how we can use AnyPoint Studio test recorder feature in Mule 4 for automatic test cases generation. This tutorial is part of a series of various tutorials that I have uploaded on this channel covering different topics related to MuleSoft. Let's look at the topics that we are going to cover in this video tutorial. First of all, we will have a high-level theoretical overview about MUnit. Then we will talk about and we will demonstrate how we can use test recorder in AnyPoint Studio. I'll explain and demonstrate how we can perform unit testing with the MUnit and how we can use different options which are available. For example, how we can use mocking for unit test cases. And then we will see that how we can generate a coverage report based on the test cases and test suite that has executed. So let's first have a quick overview at a high level about what exactly MUnit is. MUnit is basically a testing framework for Mule applications, and it's fully integrated with Maven as well as fully integrated with the AnyPoint Studio. So whenever a developer implements any of those solutions or any of the integrations using Mule applications, then in order to do the unit testing, this MUnit framework comes very handy, and you have a lot of features, a lot of options available in MUnit using which you can perform required unit testing. If we look at a high level, what exactly MuleSoft MUnit provides in terms of its functionality, some of the functionalities I have mentioned here. For example, you can create your test cases. It provides you options to do the automatic test cases creation, as well as if you want, you can do it manually for specific scenarios. And it has options where you can mock certain processors. For example, if you are calling some third-party, maybe a REST API, or maybe you're calling some database procedure, or you're having some other database related processors, and you don't want that the actual processor call should happen, then you can do the mock option there as well. And then it has the option for this to do the spying on certain processors, in which case you can have a you can spy about the inputs and outputs and what exactly happened on specific processors. And then you have options to do the verification of processor calls, and you can make sure that certain processor calls have been executed as required. And last but not least, you can also generate coverage reports. This is a great feature where you get an HTML form in the form of an HTML. You can get a report where you can see the details of the entire suite of test cases that have been executed, and that shows that how many processors were covered, and if everything from the flows has been covered, you will see the report as 100%. And if you have skipped something, that will also be shown over there. So this is the theoretical explanation at a high level. I'm not going into the nitty-gritties and into the details. You can always look into the official documentation where you will find more details. So without further ado, now let's jump into the demonstration part and see everything in real. All right, so I'm already in AnyPoint Studio, and just to save some time, what I have done is that I have already created a project with the name MUnit tutorial in AnyPoint Studio. I'm using 7.9 version, and once I've created the project, I have created a simple flow which is having a listener, which is listening on port 8081 on the path slash user, and then we are just setting a variable based on one of the query parameters. Query parameter is id parameters, and based on this id I'm having a select statement from the MySQL database where I'm doing select static from employee underscore data, employees underscore data, where employee id is equal to whatever id has been passed as a query parameter. And then I'm doing just a simple transformation of the response into the JSON format, so the whole payload is getting converted into the JSON. So I have already created this to save some time. Let me show you the database. If you see here, we have select static from tutorialspedia.employee underscore data. So if I try to execute this statement, you can see that we get many records. We get 15 records. where we have employee ID, employee name, employee department, employee salary, employee status, and employee code. This is just some example data which we will be playing around. And now what we are going to do is that we are going to see that how we can use MUnit, how we can use the test recorder feature in AnyPoint Studio to generate the test cases. So if we want to generate the test cases, just right click over here and click on MUnit, and we see here we have option create test for this flow. So once before I do this, let me run since I already loaded this project into the designer, into the embedded runtime. So I just want to run it once to show you how it works. So I have already executed it once, so I will just pass one of the user ID. For example, if I pass localhost colon 081 slash user question mark ID, so ID is equal to 2. This is the query parameter that I'm passing, and if you see here, we are getting the response. Let me zoom it so that you can see it better. So we got the response with the employee name, status, and everything else. If we try with another ID, maybe 3, then we got the response for another user. And let me try with one more, and for one I got the response, and everything is working fine. So this means the project is working fine. So now we can do the required things in order to implement the unit testing. So there are in order to do this to generate the test cases automatically, I will go to this option MUnit, and I'll choose this record test for this flow. So you're already running, so do you want to stop running? Yes, I want to stop running, so it will, because it was already running. So now you will see that once it's ready, then it will show that it's ready to record. Then we will have to run and call one of the list endpoint for this API for this HTTP listener, and then you will see that the recording will happen. So before it goes, let me show you the requirements for the test recorder. I'll go to the official documentation, test recorder in Studio. So I will just read it. The test recorder enables you to record. Let me zoom it. Test recorder enables you to record a processing flow and then configure a unit test based on the captured event. The test recorder captures real data as it goes through your application in AnyPoint Studio. By capturing the flow execution, MUnit can automatically generate an MUnit test so that you can configure the necessary mocks and assertions for your test. And as I explained, what happens is that once you will have this test recording enabled, then whenever you once you will call this endpoint, what will happen is that the real data will get captured and it will be saved into some of the DWL files, and then based on that your test cases will be generated, and then you will be able to perform any action. For example, maybe you can do spying, you can do mocking, or any other action that you want. And then once you will run your test cases and your test suites, you will get the results either success or failure based on the data. So the comparison will be between the data that has been mocked or the data that has been captured during the test recording and the data that comes while you are running the actual test. And there is a certain compatibility option that you need to look into, because you cannot run this test recorder if you're not compatible, if your environment is not compatible. For example, you need to make sure that you have AnyPoint Studio 7.5 or higher. For me it's 7.9, so it's fine. Then you should have MUnit 2.2.5, MUnit AnyPoint Studio plugin 2.5, and Mule runtime 4.3.0. I'm already running it on 4.3.0, so for me everything is fine, so I should be able to run it. So yeah, you can see now it says test, it's deployed, and it says waiting for the input data, and your Mule application is now running. So my Mule application is running. So what will happen is that now I'll try to hit my application again, localhost colon 8081 slash user question mark ID, and whatever ID I want to pass, based on that the event data and the actual data will get captured. So I'll click on this and I'm waiting for the response. You can see we got the response. Now if I go here, it says recording stopped, input recorded at, and it's showing me the time when the input has been captured. Now we have the option here, configure test. So this is the option I will use. I click on this configure test, and then I have to give file name. I'll keep it as is, munit tutorial-suite.xml, and the test name. So I'll just give it munit flow-test, I will give it -1 because the user ID that I passed in the query parameter was 1. So for that reason, I'm giving it as -1, and then I click on next. Now here you see that it is showing me in the MUnit flow uh, all the processors that which were there in my flow. We have a set variable, we have select, and we have transform message. And if you see here, flow input and flow output both are being shown. And you can see if you click here the details as well. For example, what was the URI, what was the query parameter. Since there was no URI parameter, so it's nothing there. And everything else, so we have query string where id is equal to 1, and if you see the flow output, we can see here the object that has been returned. So this is the real data that has been captured. And in the set variable, now for individual processors we can use any of the option. For example, if you choose do not perform any test action, you can choose mock this processor. And in this case, what will happen is that when you will do the real testing, it will not call the actual flow, it will not call the execute the actual processor, rather it will just use the mock data. It is normally used for the cases where you are using you are invoking some third party, maybe some third party web service, or maybe you are accessing JMS or database or something like that. But for example, in our case we have select. So select is executing uh, some query on the database. So here we can choose this option of mock this processor. So if you click on this mock processor, you get the detail. This operation will set a behavior to skip the execution of this selected processor and instead input mock data according to the configuration below. So it is showing us that it will be mocking based on this data. The data is based on the previous execution when we were doing the recording. So employee code 22, employee ID 1, employee name Ajmal Abbasi, which is my name, and employee status and everything else. But for first of all, we want without mocking. So I will not do any mocking and I will keep it as is, and I'll just click on next. So if I don't do the mocking and I choose don't perform any action, in this case, when I will run the test, it will again go to the database and it will try to fetch the data. I click on next, and here it shows here is a summary of the test that will be automatically generated. So in case of the test suite, in the test case we have three scopes: behavior scope, execution scope, and validation scope. And in the behavior scope, all the preconditions to be set before executing the test logic are set there. So basically it will be doing the set event. So event will be set where, since we are passing a query parameter, so it will be setting up the payload for that. And then in the execution, it has a flow reference where it will be referencing to the actual flow that has to be executed where we have the database call. And then it has validation where it has assertions, and there it will make sure that the data that has been received from the flow reference in the execution phase matches to whatever we have in our DWL or whatever has been captured when we were doing the recording. So I'll click on finish. So as soon as I'll click on finish, you will see that our test case will get generated, and it's just getting created right now. So you can see that we have MUnit tutorial suite, and here we have MUnit test flow test 1. So this test case has been generated, and this test case gets generated under you can see src test MUnit. So this is the path where it gets created, and if you see src test resources and MUnit test flow test 1, you can see that we have various DWL files also generated: event payload, event attributes, and expression payload. So if I open, for example, event payload, you can see it is blank as binary, and then event attributes, you will see all the attributes over here. And expression payload, here you can see the actual payload, employee code, employee department, whatever data that was captured during the recording. So let me close this. All right. So here, if you see in the behavior in the set input, it is setting the event, which is at the pre-processing level. And here, if you go down, you can see it is doing from the set event payload.dwl. So it is setting up the payload, and then it has a flow reference to the actual flow. And then we have assert payload. So in the assert payload, it's just doing the verification to make sure, and it's doing the validation to make sure that data is correct. So now if I run this test case, I should get a success in ideal scenario. So I'll run MUnit test. If you click outside, you get run MUnit test, MUnit suite, because the suite can have multiple tests. But in our case, we have only one test. So I'll just choose this option run MUnit. Okay, I will click on this test and I'll choose run MUnit test. All right, so once I click on this run MUnit test, now the testing will be done once necessary loading is done. You can see here in the, let me move it a little. So you can see in it has so far run 0 out of 0 and 0 error, and here we will see the MUnit coverage and MUnit errors later. So I'll go to console and I will wait. It's right now starting coverage server. So once everything will be started and the test will be executed, then we will be able to see the details over here. So currently it hasn't started, so we will have to wait. So now if we see in the console, we can see the status has done. And now if we go to the details, you can see the green mark, which means that the test has been executed successfully. So runs shows 1 out of 1, 0 error and 0 failures. And if we go here, we can see the details as well. And now if you go to MUnit error, you don't see anything. And if you go to MUnit coverage, you can click on this generate report, and let me expand it. You can see application coverage is shown as 100%. And in the resources, let me click on this, and now I can get the details about the flow. So the flow has total coverage of 3 processors out of 3, which means 100%. And if I just go back to the flow, you can see that these tick marks on each of the processor, which means that sorry, which means that all of these processors have been executed successfully. Now I want to do another thing to show you that how this test can fail. What happened is that we did not do the mocking, so every time it's going to the real data, and some data which is already there based on the captured event is there in the payload. So in the payload you can see we have employee ID 22 and the department is operation, salary is 9,500, and status 1, name is Ajmal Abbasi, employee ID is 1. So what I will do is that I will try to make some changes into the database for the actual data, and then we will run the test again. Since it will compare the data that it will capture, that it has captured previously and is available here, and it will compare it with the data that comes from the database, and there will be a mismatch if I make any changes in the database. So we should get a failure for the test. So that's what I want to show you. So for this user in the department, let me change it to IT. So this is a change that I'm trying to make. I will just apply this change, and now the data has changed over there. So now what I will do is that I will go again to the test case and I'll try to run this test. So once again we are running the test, but now we have changed the data. Since we are not doing any mocking, so it will be going to the database and it will be expecting that the data that has been captured previously and the data that has been received from the database with this test execution should match, which is not going to match, and we should be getting an error and the test case should fail. So let's wait for this test coverage server starting and the test execution, and once this test will be executed, we will be able to see the results over here. So now test has been executed. Let's go to the MUnit and see the results. So we can see that the color is not green this time. This means that the test has failed. Okay, so now if you go to MUnit error, you should be able to see what exactly is the cause of this failure. So it says the payload does not match at the files, and it says that expected was employee ID 22, employee department operations, and it received is with the department IT. So this is the error which caused the failure of this test case. The reason is that we made the modification into the database in the database table, and that resulted in a mismatch. Now we will see that if we do the mocking, in that case, even if we make some changes in the database, so it will not be calling executing the actual processor, and it will be skipping that. In that case, it will still succeed. So for that purpose, what I will do is that I will generate another test case. So I will go to the flow. I'll right click and I will go to MUnit and record test for this flow. And this time I will record it for the employee with the ID 2, not with the 1. And for the 2, we will enable the mocking as well at the select database operation level. So let's wait for this project to get loaded, and we will start the recorder, and then we will try with the ID 2. So now test recorder says that it's waiting for the input data and application is now running. So we are going to try it with the ID 2, and for that we should be receiving the response. And here you can see that we got a response with employee code 29 ID, and department is IT, and then other details with the name Mark Wood. And if we go back, we can see that it says recording has stopped and input data is recorded. So now we are going to click on configure test, and let's give the name of the test to rename it to test2. Click on next, and in this case for the select, I'm going to choose this option of mock this processor. And when we mock it, then it will be always relying on the data that it has recorded, which is with the employee code 29 and department IT, salary 7800. And I'll click on next. I'll not do any other changes, and I'll just click on finish. So now it will generate this test, and you can see that it has already generated the test. And now you can see from the previous test there's a difference, that it has a mock as well. So previously it was only set input, but now, which is the basically a set event operation, but now we have a mocking as well. So if you see here for the mock, it has a doc ID as well with the value, and this is based on this ID it's doing the mocking. Now I will try to run this test case. I will run this MUnit test, and we should be getting a success for this test. And next time we will make some changes for this employee with ID 2 in the database, and we will see what happens with that. So it says run 0 out of 0. So far it hasn't run this, so it's loading. So we will wait for this test to get executed. All right, so we can see that the test has executed and it is successful. And if we see, we don't see any error in the MUnit error section. And if you go to MUnit coverage, so it's still doing something. So we will wait for that, and then we will generate the report. Yeah, let's create the report. And we can see that it has 100% coverage and it has successfully completed. Now for the same employee with the ID 2, I want to make some changes in the database, and I want to see if that will make any impact or not. So let's change the salary to 2500. We change the value from the previous value to a new value, and just apply this. Okay, so now after applying this, I want to run the test again. I will go back and I will run this second test. So I'll choose this run MUnit test, and now we are expecting that the test should still be successful, because the test is not going into the actual database. It's skipping that processor, and it is relying on the mock data. Let's wait for the test to get executed. So now you can see that the test has successfully executed and there is no error. And we can see that if we go to MUnit coverage and if we generate the report, we still see that it has success. Everything went fine. And if you go here, we can see that it has 100% coverage for all the processors. And the reason is that because it did not go into the for the processor which was calling the database, it relied on the mocking. So it used the mock data, and the mock data is same in all cases, so it's not going to the actual data in this case, and we are still getting the success. So in the real scenarios, for those processors for which you want to make sure that you are trying the real data, you will not do the mocking. You will do the mocking for only those processors for which maybe you don't want that every time the data should be fetched, and the testing for that data is not important. Or maybe you don't have access for, maybe for example the database that you are trying to call, you don't have access to that database from your dev environment or your test environment, and you don't want that to include it, and you just want the mock data to be used for that, you can do that. But for the other processors for which you want to make sure that the real data should be tested against the recorded data, then you should not do the mocking. All right, so that's it from this tutorial about MuleSoft MUnit test recording feature. If you look into the documentation for this MUnit, you will see that we have plenty of other options, and this is very vast in terms of its functionality and features. So one video is not sufficient to cover everything. I'll try my best to create more videos covering other aspects of MUnit, and see how we can do the manual testing, how we can do the assertions, and how we can play around with different type of matches. So I will try to make more videos. For that, you will have to make sure that you just follow this channel and subscribe to the channel, and look for the future videos. And if you have any questions or any ambiguities, you can always write in the comment section. And for more information, you can look into the playlist where I have other topics related to any MuleSoft, if you want to learn more about MuleSoft and the power of MuleSoft. And of course, official documentation of MuleSoft is always the most reliable source of information for you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more videos in the future.